near the end of the day on May 5th, there's a group of war correspondents and newspaper reporters who follow the army around, who write up newspaper reports, and then, of course, they have to get those transmitted back to the newspapers back home. And you can't necessarily do that from the battlefront, so they draw straws to see who's going to have to go back up to Washington, so that they can get those reports for their paper sent back home. And of course, the youngest guy draws the short straw, and so he has to start working his way back up to Washington. And as he's leaving, he pops by General Grant's tent and says, "Hey, I'm headed back up to Washington. Is there anything you would like me to tell anybody?" And to give you an idea of maybe just how more accessible some of our politicians were back in those days, Grant says, "Well, if you happen to run into the president," as one does, tell him that no matter what happens tonight, the rest of the night tonight, no matter what happens tomorrow, there will be no turning back. And so as, "Yes, sir, Mr. General," and he runs off to Washington. Now his trip back to Washington is pretty exciting. He ends up having to basically cajole himself into access to a U.S. military telegraph, which in order to transmit his reports. That, of course, ends up with those reports ending up in the War Department office and in the hands of General Secretary of War Stanton. This is the first report that Stanton actually gets from Wilderness. Is, "Get this guy to the White House. Sit him in front of Lincoln for a debrief." So this reporter ends up in front of Lincoln, and he gives him like the skinny on what had happened on May 5th, because they hadn't heard about May 6th yet. By the time he gets there, May 6th has already happened. They haven't heard about May 6th yet. And so he gives them the rundown, like, "This is what I know about what happened on May 5th. And he says, "Well, Mr. President, before I left, Grant gave me a message for you." And he says that no matter what happens, Mr. President, there will be no turning back. And when Lincoln hears this, Lincoln, big guy, tall guy, famously, stands up, grabs the reporter in a bear hug, lifts him off of his feet, and starts kissing him on the forehead. Because at this point, Lincoln finally knows that he has found the general that is going to win the war. Right? So we've talked about what do you do when things aren't going well, when things go wrong. Well, this is what Grant does. He keeps moving, and he looks for somewhere else where things can start going right. Right, because what is the Army of the Potomac traditionally done when things haven't gone well? Can anyone, seriously, that's an open question. They retreat, right? What did the Army of the Potomac did when Fredericksburg didn't go well? They retreated. What did it do when Chancellorsville didn't go well? Right. So for the first time, the Army of the Potomac, at least after when on an aggressive footing, is not only going to stand and fight. By the time it's all said and done, they're going to choose to advance. Right? So, Wilderness is not a good time for anybody. Right? No one has fun out here. This is not necessarily a battle that the Army of the Potomac chose. It's a battle that Lee chooses, and it's a battle that's not ultimately going to go particularly well for him either, in the grand scheme of things. Nobody wins the Battle of Wilderness. But when the push comes to shove, the Army of the Potomac, under Grant and Meade, chooses to shove back. And they're going to keep shoving back for the next 9 months. Until the Army of Northern Virginia falls over at Appomattox. Grant probably would have preferred it to happen a lot faster than that. Lincoln sure would have. But if that's what it was going to take, that's what they were going to do.